We help build a better future when we harness the power to develop new ideas. The power to demonstrate what we're made of. To be the role model our community needs. To be recognized for who we are and what we do. The power to have the same opportunities as everyone else. To break ceilings or to build bridges. To make things happen. To start something new. ¿Y tú? ¿Qué quieres lograr? What would you like the power to do?
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Chandler with Bank of America, and we are so proud to be back again this year as a statewide sponsor of Big Bang. And it is an impressive week when we look at the lineup of powerful speakers and breakout sessions. It's hard to believe it's been 13 years, and we're so pleased to be involved again. Social Venture Partners continues to bring people and partners together to drive solutions and equitable outcomes in not only Dallas, but across the state of Texas. This work drives powerful conversations on racial, social, and economic equity, topics that are very important to Bank of America. And that's exactly why we've committed $1.25 billion over 5 years, focused on housing, health, jobs, and small business. Thank you for joining this particular conversation today on innovations in homelessness and housing, a very important part of economic mobility. Just this month, Bank of America announced a $2 million commitment to the Dallas Real-Time Rapid Rehousing Initiative to help move 2,700 individuals and families from homelessness into housing. We're committed not only because we see the need, but frankly, we have confidence in Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance and their ability to work with partners to solve these key issues. In addition, I'm pleased to share that with our community home ownership commitment, we've provided over $12 million in closing costs and down payments and grants for homeowners to be able to move into affordable housing right here in North Texas. It's part of our Bank of America commitment, and we are working to get the word out. So please take advantage of this home ownership grants. Thank you again for joining us today. And I'll now turn it over to Ashley Flores with the Child Poverty Action Lab to begin our discussion.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ashley Flores. I'm a senior director with the Child Poverty Action Lab here in Dallas, and I lead our portfolio of housing projects. I am honored to moderate today's panel on innovations to address homelessness and housing. So let's jump right in with introductions. We have Joli Angel Robinson, who is currently the president and CEO of the Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance. She works to lift up the conversation around housing and homelessness and supports the homelessness ecosystem in Dallas and Collin counties. She previously served as the VP of Government Affairs and Public Policy at Dallas Area Habitat for Humanity, and also managed the Office of Community Affairs and the Youth Outreach Unit at the Dallas Police Department. We are also joined by Mandy Chapman-Semple, who is a nationally recognized social systems transformation expert with skill in building working partnerships across housing, healthcare, employment, government, philanthropy, and other essential services to drive complete transformation of social systems in pursuit of collective impact goals. Mandy served as Houston's first special assistant to the mayor for homelessness initiatives for 3.5 years under 2 Houston mayors, and was responsible for designing and co-managing the implementation of Houston's nationally recognized homeless system transformation, which produced a 60% reduction in homelessness in 4 years. We also have with us Mark Melton, a tax attorney in Holland and Knight's Dallas office. He focuses on corporate and federal income taxation issues related to domestic and international transactions of private equity and hedge funds, as well as other investment partnerships, joint ventures, real estate investment trusts, and operating businesses. Most recently, Mark is also the founder of the Dallas Eviction Advocacy Center and he and his team have connected with thousands of renters at risk of losing their homes during the pandemic. Welcome, Mark, Mandy, and Joli. So when we were preparing for this conversation last week, our panelists made an important point when it comes to housing. Everyone is looking for innovation, something new and revolutionary to solve the complex issues we're experiencing in Dallas. The reality is that innovation in housing is really about implementing what we know works, building the systemic infrastructure necessary to reach housing affordability and stability at scale, and ensuring that we're meeting people where they're at along the way. So Mandy, let's start with the big picture. Can you talk us through the housing continuum that spans secure, stable housing on one end and chronic homelessness on the other? What does it look like for a neighbor to move along this continuum?
Thanks, Ashley. I appreciate the opportunity to start here with this framing. You know, so often we fail to really appreciate that an individual who's experiencing chronic homelessness, the real root cause of that started with the lack of affordable housing available to that individual. So when we think about our communities more broadly, there's a huge number of people that are seeking affordable housing and can't find it. And when those individuals can't find affordable housing, they're forced to overpay in our housing market, making themselves rent burdened. And all of those individuals are then at risk of experiencing housing disruption and housing instability and facing ultimately eviction. When we don't have then the social safety nets that are available to respond and catch those individuals to help them avoid eviction, those individuals can then fall into homelessness. And when our homeless systems don't have the ability to respond immediately to those individuals entering homelessness, those individuals languish in that system and become more and more unhealthy and suffer from more and more conditions that add to the complexity of their situation and frankly to the complexity of the solution. So interestingly, our continuum of homelessness really begins with the availability of affordable housing and the availability of safety nets all along the way.
Thanks, Mandy. Joli, to build on this idea of the continuum, where should we start? It feels like there's a need at every step of the way, but where should we start and why?
Really great. I talk about advocacy in this space. It's really critically important to the point that Mandy brought forth. Advocacy, even around affordable housing. So if we don't know, I love to root us in affordable housing really is for everyone and anyone. It means your housing shouldn't take up more than 30% of your income. I love to relate the concept of affordable housing to each and every one of us, regardless of income, right? Most of the time, we kind of pigeonhole the need for affordable housing for those that are lower on the socioeconomic scale. But that's not it. That's not the only need for affordable housing. So really it's for individuals, like I mentioned, across the income spectrum that really need affordable housing. As the rising cost of everything is going up, I just filled up my gas tank with more dollars than I previously had to. That comes into play when thinking about my income is now split in a variety of ways, increasing cost of living. Does it match the increase in pay? I think great resources abound in this space for families, for women that may be experiencing homelessness. And our previous point in time count, we saw and we continue to see a disproportionate number of Black men that are impacted through the system. And they are overrepresented in the number of those that are experiencing homelessness. So some parts of our ecosystem, and not to the fault of the ecosystem, people have been doing some tremendous work. I see specifically for a population of those that are youth experiencing homelessness. There was a previous organization I had a conversation with, Outlast Youth, and those youth specifically were those that were a part of the LGBTQ+ community. So I wanted to lift that up as well, that seemed to be disproportionately impacted by youth homelessness and involved in that. I think, as we think about the continuum, we also must think about not only the affordable housing component, but the prevention and diversion opportunities. I know Mark is going to go into the work that he's been doing in that space as it pertains to eviction, but really looking at a propensity of those that may be experiencing the worst of our systems. DISD, I know, does a tremendous job for those that are in the education system, those youth that are experiencing homelessness. But when those schools were closed down due to COVID, then how were those youth impacted in that way? So that really is, to me, about digging into also some of the equity work when it comes to moving people in and out of poverty and supporting those who are at the precipice of experiencing the worst of our systems.
Thanks, Joli. So you started to touch on this, but when we look at our local context, who are we serving well right now in the housing ecosystem? You mentioned women and families. Tell us a little bit about where we're getting it right and what we're doing in that space to get it right.
Yeah, I think with the real-time rapid rehousing work, many thanks to our partners, Bank of America, and those that have also given their dollars in that space. We're really looking at, for this year, putting lifting up, amplifying the needs of our veterans in that space. We do see a number of our veterans that are experiencing homelessness, so all coming together in a collaborative effort to really focus on our veterans. As I mentioned before, there is an overrepresentation of Black men that are in our homeless population. So how are we serving them well? How are we not serving them well? Digging into that. As we move forward in the Dallas Real-Time Rapid Rehousing work and the Homeless Collaborative and Continuum of Care, thinking about our youth and families that are impacted by homelessness and those that are chronically homeless, also ensuring that we're serving those. I think we do those services well for those that may not need intensive wraparound services or foundation or support to move themselves out of that chronic homelessness cycle. And so I think that's where we continue to dig into the work is those populations that may be hardest to reach, may be hardest to serve, but may be impacted most by the systems that aren't really serving them well, those hard to reach, hard to serve populations. And there's so many brilliant brains that are digging into how can we do that best, understanding their stories, unpacking what their needs may be, and then providing services and case management to ensure we're serving them best.
Thanks, Joli. So Mark, let's turn to you. Joli queued up your work well. So you work a bit more upstream. How can we better support our neighbors in advance of a crisis event? And from what you're seeing, what should prevention efforts look like?
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of those programs now for the first time during the pandemic with rent assistance programs. And just as importantly, with the work that we're doing at the Dallas Eviction Advocacy Center, we're providing free lawyers to tenants that are facing eviction. And what we find is that if a person goes into a courtroom with an eviction, the odds of them getting evicted are extremely high if they go alone. If they go in with a lawyer, the odds are actually extremely low. And so a lot of the work we do, I always like to say it's about 40% legal work and 60% social work, because we run parallel tracks where we make sure that the tenants' rights are protected and that they're not being taken advantage of in the eviction proceeding, but we're also working with the rent assistance providers around the city to try and expedite those applications to get all the back rent paid, so that we've got a scenario where we don't have small landlords or even large landlords bearing the burden of this pandemic and this housing issue. There is a win-win scenario out there that I think we are seeing works when it comes to rent assistance. But having a lawyer with you to help you navigate the legal system, to convince the judges of what the law actually is in a lot of cases, is so super important. Houston just passed a new right to counsel ordinance a few weeks ago, where every tenant in Houston that is facing eviction has a right to free counsel. And through the legal aid providers down there, they're working to implement that now. So I think that probably is a very important issue, along with some kind of continued rent assistance program that goes beyond the pandemic. Because the reality is if you get evicted, it's not like you have a foot fault and you pay a small fine and you get back on your feet and you continue to move on. This is a life-altering event for a lot of people. And if you think about what it takes to really get someone stood back up and become financially independent, it's a lot. And I always like to explain this through an actual story of a client that we helped. And this was a young mother. She was 20 years old. She had two kids, ages 4 and 3. She had previously been homeless and had gone through the shelter system, had gotten back to work and was independent. And then the pandemic hits and her job goes away. So while she's facing eviction, we step in and help delay the eviction as a result of the moratoriums, start to try and help her get the rent assistance money to get caught up. The landlord in this particular case was a fairly bad actor. And so since he couldn't legally evict, he recruited some of the local gang members that lived in his complexes to go harass her and scare her out of the apartment. So we had to go over there at 1 o'clock in the morning with Dallas police, pick her and her kids up and all of their things, which all of her things fit in the back of my car. She didn't have much. But then the process of trying to rebuild her life begins, and you look at what this costs. So, her kids had the worst case of lice I've ever seen, so they can't go to school or daycare until we resolve that. So we have to have medical treatments for lice for the kids and for her, in fact. We have to find her an apartment to live in. She's got to pay, deposits of first month's rent, which obviously she didn't have. We've got to find a daycare or a school for her kids. That costs money as well. And even to the extent we've got voucher programs to cover that, those things can take weeks or months to apply for and actually receive. And so in the meantime, what does a young mother of two do without some help to really stand her up and get her back to financial independence? So, and those are just a few of the things that we worked with her on to get her back to independence, which she is now today and working again and doing well. So it's a major ordeal for someone to overcome when they have no support system, no money, and no options.
So Mark, with the story of the client that you just shared, if you could have turned back time and met her before the eviction process had begun, what set of supports ideally or resources would have been available to her to avoid this kind of encounter, this eviction process with her landlord in the first place?
Well, I mean, I think the only thing that the landlord cared about was getting his money, right, for rent. So, and this was really early on when the rent assistance programs were kind of ad hoc. There wasn't a federally funded program yet, and so it was difficult having to make all these phone calls to, try and find a pot of money to help her. And one of the observations that I made early on was, I'm a fairly connected guy in this town, and I know a lot of people, and I know most of the nonprofit executives, and I spent a whole day calling around to everyone I knew saying, where are these resources to help this person? And it was almost impossible for me to find. And so if you've got someone sitting out there with, no computer, no access to the internet, and no idea of where to even begin this process, you figure out real quickly just how difficult it is.
Mark, I think we may have lost you for that last sentence. Do you want to repeat that last bit you just said?
Oh, did I freeze? I wasn't sure if it was me or you, but sorry about that.
It could have been me. Could have been me, but just in case, will you say that last bit again?
Yeah, no, I was just saying that it's very difficult for a lot of these people, especially if they don't have technology support or internet access, to be able to find the resources that they need. And that assumes that those resources even exist.
Yeah, that certainly aligns with a project that CPAL did in the spring. We were working with 2 elementary schools in neighborhoods with historically high eviction filing rates. And that just access to information, just knowing that resources were available was hard to come by. I think we have, particularly in the COVID era, an over-reliance on spreading information through the internet. But if you don't have consistent, reliable access to internet, if you aren't sure how to navigate the millions of websites that might pop up if you search for rental assistance, then you're out of luck. And so something that we found was that it's really important to spread information about resources within networks, on the ground, face-to-face, word of mouth, their trusted messengers who people are going to in their community.
And you know, on that point, I think that's a really important point, because one of the other things that we've observed in the last 18 months or how long this has been going on is that most people had no idea that rent assistance was available, even after it was there for a year. They had no idea that there were free lawyers available. In fact, I was in a courtroom, this was probably 9 or 10 months ago, and I was the first one up, and we gave the landlord the moratorium declaration that stopped her eviction in front of the courtroom. And by the way, that a copy of that declaration was actually attached to the court paperwork that every single tenant got, but they never read back 3 or 4 pages because to them it all looked like large font boilerplate language, and so they didn't understand. And so at the end of my hearing, I went into this little conversation with the judge, and I said, Judge, is it true that if someone turns in this declaration like we just did, they'll stop their eviction? And she said, yes, it is. I said, well, is it also true that on page 3 of everyone in this room citation, there's a copy of this declaration that they can sign and give to their landlord right now? And she said, that's absolutely right. That'll stop their eviction. And behind me are 20 people sitting, in the gallery of this courtroom, and all I hear is paper shuffling because they had no idea that their salvation was literally in their hands.
Hmm. Joli and Mandy, just to build on what Mark has been sharing, what are you seeing in your work with clients and neighbors as far as what they know or don't know about resources and how they're accessing them? Also, what best practices have you noticed that are helpful in making sure that everyone knows what's available to them and can access without facing barriers?
I'll share a couple of tidbits that when Mark was speaking made me think about. I know there's a misconception that we can teach people how to budget their way out of these situations or make the quote unquote right choices, but that's simply not true. So I'm thankful that this conversation is thinking about it at the system level, because there are system changes that have to take place to serve those that need us to serve them best. I'm one of those individuals. Previously, as a City of Dallas employee, I was making $45,000 a year. That's college educated, making $45,000 a year. And I make a very real case for someone who needs affordable housing in a city that is difficult to find. What would 30% of my income on housing be? Where would I have the opportunity to live where I feel safe? If I had children, that I could have my kids attend a local public school that my kid could thrive in, that when I'm walking my dog in the morning and in the evening, that I am also feeling safe in the community. So I did want to lift up, I think, to keep that at the forefront of, it's more than just education, more budget and savings education components when we're talking about those serving individuals here in our city and our region. It's more than just, having people go through an exercise of making better decisions, but it's also looking at the system and the barriers that are continuing to be placed and the challenges that are continuing to be placed in front of people. So that's why I always lead with advocacy, because when legislation is coming across, when we're going to the ballot box and we're voting on some of the things that we see come in front of us, that we're leading with that lens as well, which is a lens about equity, which may not be a struggle that we feel or a pain point that we personally feel, but thinking about our neighbor that may be experiencing the worst of some of our systems.
Yeah, and I think just to add to this, and pulling up to a little bit of systems thinking theory, the thing we fail to often appreciate when we're designing systems, especially social safety net systems like the ones that have been described here, is that it isn't just about making a series of things available. So we have to intentionally connect each of those things in order to produce a system that produces the desired behavior that we're looking for. So if we want individuals to avoid eviction, we can't just create an eviction moratorium. We have to actually create a system that individuals can navigate. And so when you've asked that question, Ashley, have we seen this in other aspects of that continuum that we just described? The answer is absolutely yes. Oftentimes when you think about all of the investments that are being made in a variety of really important activities. We're helping to respond to individuals' basic needs through food pantries and soup kitchens. We're responding to individuals' need for shelter through the investment in emergency shelters and interim housing. We're responding to individuals' need for case management and mental health and healthcare, but we're not necessarily thinking intentionally about how to connect each of these pieces that makes it possible for an individual to navigate them seamlessly and effortlessly. And that's often the real tragedy in most of what we see, is that it's not that we lack the ability to help, it's that we lack the ability to connect someone to that help. And we oftentimes overthink it too. So creating some of that simplicity that Mark was speaking to, being more transparent, and much of the work that we're doing in the homelessness response system today in Dallas and across the country is really rooted in this idea of how do we start to create the connections between all of these investments and then scale those investments to respond in its totality to the need in front of us, because we now confidently know that every one of those investments is going to be connected to an individual in need. It really is a central feature of how we need to respond to the entire spectrum. Is we have to make investments, and we have to make sure we connect each of those pieces so individuals can benefit from them.
Ashley, I'm sorry, I have to lift up Child Poverty Action Lab and all of the data you all do, because you are great at showing propensity models for some of the very things that we're talking about, these sticky situations that we're talking about that can help us have investments on the front end of tackling whatever the thing is that we're interested in tackling. So I do want to just lift up the work that you all are doing, which is so helpful for us to be more data informed about the way we're moving forward. What neighborhoods should we focus on? Should we have community advocates going door to door? What does that look like? To Mandy's point, sometimes we overthink it, right? Sometimes we're coming with a different level of, if we put it on the internet, people will be able to find it. But what does it look like for us to really use that data that you all have done so that we're going door to door if necessary, using community advocates, our faith-based community, our libraries, are in the grocery store? What does it look like for us to be right there in community, ensuring that we're getting this information?
Well, thanks for that shout out, Joli. And for folks who might not be familiar, CPAL put together, has been working with Dallas County to bring more transparency to eviction data so that our frontline nonprofits, agencies, and other organizations have better information on where to go to connect with tenants, on what neighborhoods have faced historically high eviction filing rates, where there is a density of renters that might need access to information about what's available for them. So thank you for that, Joli. I'm glad it's useful. Mandy, I'd love to go back to something you said. You were talking about the importance of making connections so that the experience is really seamless for residents. What does that practically mean? And that sounds great, connecting the dots to make an experience better, but what does that look like, on the ground? What are the tactical things, for example, that MDHA might be working on right now to improve that connective tissue across the system of supports?
Yeah, I can think of two specific examples I'd like to share. One within the homelessness response system itself, and then the other thinking all the way upstream related to affordable housing. These two things are inevitably linked, and access within both of those spheres becomes really important. So when it comes to homelessness response, we've very practically identified that there are a handful of ways individuals exit homelessness, and we can package the services that those individuals need with the housing supports intentionally. So we can go ahead and pre-connect the right sets of supports for those individuals. And then we can focus on connecting each of the various service supports that we offer to help someone move from their literal homelessness all the way through each step to be connected to that package of care and to exit homelessness. And we've been very intentional to look at the entire ecosystem, identify who does what part, and pre-package those what we are calling exit pathways so that we can systematically connect individuals and move them as seamlessly as possible. And the role that MDHA plays is in helping to facilitate this level of planning, this level of connection, and in monitoring and supporting the movement of those individuals. The service providers, the agencies that are delivering the services, are the ones actually connected to the client. But an organization like MDHA, who's serving as the backbone and as the system administrator, they're looking at the data and making sure that no individual is falling out of that system that we've created, and making sure that each of the entities are empowered and supported, and we are identifying obstacles if we find them in that system, and we're driving to accelerate individuals through that system as quickly as possible. How do we maximize the connections so that individuals can minimize the amount of time that they're in crisis? And that's happening very practically. The Dallas Real-Time Rapid Rehousing Initiative is an example of packaging those supports, services, and housing, intentionally investing in navigators, and intentionally connecting people to that process, and tracking for the individuals as they move through that process. And the goal is to use this experience to accelerate and improve the ability of the homelessness response system to respond not just to these 2,700 individuals, but to all individuals experiencing homelessness in the future. Well, if we go back upstream and we start looking at affordable housing, making things accessible and connecting individuals equally plays when someone needs affordable housing. One of the things that we often do is we invest in the creation of affordable housing, but then we don't think about how individuals who are most in need of that affordable housing, how those individuals can connect to it. And we end up creating barriers unintentionally, like running a credit check, making sure individuals have good tenant history. Well, the reality is that if individuals had good tenant history and a perfect credit, they wouldn't necessarily need the affordable housing. And so it's each of these decisions that we make when we're packaging the solutions and connecting those solutions to individuals. We need to think about how to create that connection and how to avoid unintentional barriers to access.
Thanks, Mandy. So I think it's a good opportunity to pivot and talk more big picture about housing affordability, because it's so inextricably linked to everything else, in the city. So when we think about the series of events that ultimately leads to a housing crisis for a neighbor, housing affordability is almost always part of the story. And when we were getting ready for today, I did a little digging and found that the National Low-Income Housing Coalition recently reported that the Dallas-Fort Worth-Arlington metro area has a deficit of 190,000 affordable and available rental units for households that are at or below 50% of our area median income. Or put another way to think about it, the hourly wage necessary to afford a 2-bedroom unit at fair market rent in the metro area is $26 an hour. So the cost of housing is staggering and only increasing. So I'd love to open it up to the group. What should we be doing as a city and as a region to ensure that our housing supply better meets demand and that we're meeting the affordability needs for households at all income levels? What should we be doing that we're not doing right now?
Well, I think one of the things we should be doing is increasing housing stock, right? Which, back to you don't need innovation, you just need to do what makes sense. In my view, affordable housing is something of a myth. We spend a lot of time with people that have been displaced through eviction, trying to find them another place to go. And when you've got someone that's bringing home, $2,000 a month after taxes, and they've got a spouse or a child, I would challenge everyone watching this to get on the internet after this is over and go try and find an apartment anywhere in Dallas for $600 a month. It just almost doesn't exist. You'll be lucky to find something less than 900 in any part of town, whether it's a good part of town or what you might think of as a bad part of town. $900 a month is really the floor in most cases. And for most of these apartments, if you've had an eviction in the last 2 years, you're just not even eligible to apply. If you have any kind of felony on your record, in a lot of cases, you're not eligible to apply. There are so many barriers to even getting into expensive housing, much less finding something that you could actually afford. And so we need to be a little bit more intentional about building housing that is down there in the lower price point so that people can actually afford to live there. And everyone says, well, what about vouchers and Section 8 and all this kind of stuff? Well, that's great. You can go apply at DHA for a voucher. There's a 12-month waiting list. So I don't know what you're going to do for the next 12 months, but you're not getting into that program more than likely anytime soon. And landlords aren't required to take these vouchers, and most of them don't. And so even to the extent we have these programs that do try to provide some rent subsidies or offsets, there's no one to take them. And so we would struggle, I think, scaling. That's one of the things that Joli's going to have to figure out here with this rapid rehousing is how do you find that stock of properties out there that are willing to take all this money that we've set aside to try and help get people back on their feet.
I would add, as much as we center the conversation about creation of affordable housing, one of the things Dallas and the region really has to dig into is preservation of quote unquote affordable housing, right? So if you're a Dallas site, think about 10th Street area around the zoo, right? Think about West Dallas 15, 20 years ago. Think about the area around Fair Park. Think about all of the different parts of our city that have gone through change, right? Many of us use the term gentrification. I use the term displacement of individuals that were previously there, who could afford to live there and who lived there for generations. And so when we think about policies and systems that are going to be in place to serve our residents, anyone that's looking for somewhere to live, we have to get really, really serious about preservation of affordable housing. Does that look like community land trusts for individuals, right? That's something that's been a conversation in a variety of cities and communities here locally and throughout our country. Austin has a community land trust in a couple of different areas. It also is about safeguards against displacement. So we know that our elder community, they get a freeze, quote unquote, in taxes. And so what does that look like if we had a graduated tax for those based on income? What does it look like if we had a fully invested housing trust fund from our city that then could help support people and provide those safeguards? So there's really some policies and tactics in place because land costs are increasing here in Dallas. So building housing, whether you're focused on density so that it could perhaps be more affordable. We talk about the missing middle here in the city. That means those duplex, condo, townhomes, right? Not necessarily only single family. But the other part of the conversation that we also have to think about is the preservation of affordable housing or housing for those that may need it, may already be somewhere, but they continue to see a steady increase of their taxes each year, which is pricing them out.
Yeah, I would just add to that, I guess echo everything that's been said and, push even further to acknowledge that if we want real affordability and we want to support balance in our community, we have to think about inviting affordability into our communities. We have to demand integration of affordable housing into our neighborhoods. And that's how we're going to create opportunities for individuals who are displaced through revitalization and through expansion of development to find affordable housing in the same parts of the city that you and I want to be a part of. We also, I just want to echo the importance of preservation and revitalization needs to be reframed and be rooted in the idea of preservation and the perseverance of affordability. All too often, revitalization has been used truly as a displacement tactic, and we're not then complementing displacement with integration in the rest of our community. So we have to invite affordable housing into our neighborhoods. We do that by allowing it from a zoning perspective, by not like not identifying affordable housing as being any different than any other kind of housing. Housing is housing. We have to ensure that that landlords take rental assistance, that they take the subsidy. And many states across the country have made it such that it's discrimination not to take the subsidy. And I think when you think about the individuals who are often experiencing the most displacement and the most rejection as a result of having access to those safety nets and supports, there is true discrimination that's built into our system and our policies that we need to address and tackle. So, you know, integration and welcoming affordable housing has to be at the center of what we want to achieve in our community. That is the innovation that we can bring to bear.
Thanks, Mandy. So we have a number of questions that have come in from the audience. So I will pick a few to share with our panelists. And then before we close out, I've got a couple of final rapid fire questions for the group. But let's start with this question. What is the disconnect between the 2,700 point in time homeless count and the reported 4,000 plus homeless DISD students?
I just wanted to clarify the 2,700 is pertaining to the Dallas Real-Time Rapid Rehousing Goal. The last point in time count, I believe, was 4,500 individuals in Dallas and Collin County experiencing homelessness. Those are sheltered and unsheltered numbers. The number that DISD reports on are those students that could be living with a relative that is not a mom or dad, right? It could be an aunt, it could be another friend, a classmate, something to that effect as well. I'm hoping I'm understanding and providing clarity, but I just wanted to just lift that up to provide clarity on those numbers.
Thanks, Joli. Yeah, that is often confusing, that the way the Department of Education defines a student experiencing homelessness is different than how HUD defines homelessness. So then it's a bit different, which can be confusing. Okay, another question that came in from the audience. Stagnant wages are a critical root cause of homelessness. For example, people not being able to keep up with rising costs, taxes, and other living expenses. Any perspective on how your work may influence the broader externalities like stagnating wages that impacts homelessness?
I think you need a PhD in economics to answer that question. That's a tough one. You know, I was actually talking with someone about this the other day. We were talking about, you know, the costs of housing and, you know, how much it cost me to rent a place when I first moved to Dallas, you know, over 20 years ago. You know, I think my first apartment that I rented here was tiny and not new, but I think my rent was $450 a month. You know, and at the time, you know, I was making $8 an hour, working at a bar, going to school, and you know, so that was affordable. I didn't have a whole lot, but I could at least feed my two kids and keep a roof over their heads and, you know, do things like that. But now that same apartment, you know, rents for $975 a month, you know, and, you know, a lot of people that we deal with are still making $8 an hour or $10 an hour. And so, you know, wages have stagnated. And this is probably a larger economic decision or issue that you got to deal with, but it would probably be on the scope of this conversation, but happy to talk to anyone about it afterwards if they want.
I would offer that I don't know that any of our programs are going to have a dramatic effect on wages overall, but we can each do our part. So, for example, in the homelessness response system, with this real-time Dallas Rapid Rehousing Initiative, one of the things we've done is actually look at the salaries of the individuals who work in the homelessness response system, who are going to be funded to provide navigation and to provide case management to these individuals. And we're making sure that those individuals are making an appropriate wage. And we've encouraged the entire ecosystem to raise its wages, because the people who are responding to homelessness shouldn't themselves be on the verge of homelessness as a result of not being paid. So this is a very micro answer to a very macro question, but I think that we can all raise awareness and start to take action that puts value around work and starts to reflect the importance that if we pay people well, they can afford to live successfully.
Mandy, I think that's a great point. There's nationally a lot of conversation about moving to a $15 minimum wage. I think in my dream world, every municipality we'd have wages that start at the rent wage, that $26 an hour I mentioned earlier, that will get you a 2-bedroom at fair market rent. Now, I recognize that's a pie in the sky kind of dream, but I think we oversimplify the realities of what housing costs when we aren't talking about it in a local context relative to our kind of fair market rent. So we've just got a couple more minutes. So I'd like to end with 2 rapid fire questions for our panelists. So Joli, Mandy, and Mark, if you each had a magic wand to do anything to improve the housing ecosystem in Dallas and ensure that all of our neighbors can stay securely housed, what would you do and why? And let's start with Mark.
Well, I would find a way to make this rent assistance program permanent. Is rapid fire. I could go longer, but I was trying to keep it short. So
I appreciate the brevity. Joli, what would your magic wand do?
My magic wand would let's invest in the infrastructure and systems on the front end and not the back end. Yes, we need it to serve those that need it most, but let's be intentional and dig into the work and invest in those safeguards, invest in communities on the front end.
And to build on that, I would say compel or force our rental market to accept the subsidies that we're putting on the table to support individuals. I think that if we did those 3 things, we'd have a killer project.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Let's make it happen. So our last question, I'd like to end with a call to action for folks who have tuned in today. What are some tangible next steps that our participants who are here today can take and who are eager to learn or do more? What should they be doing next?
I'll be really quick. I mentioned it before, advocate. That means if you have an opportunity to ask an elected official about, do they believe in the fair share model of housing? That means housing that's in high opportunity areas as well. When you ask an elected official about, some of the services and efforts and projects that they're going to support, and not simply focus on the NIMBYism, not in my backyard for some of our work. So when I talk to folks about some of those tangible steps, it's advocate for those systems and services.
I would. Oh,
go ahead, Mandy.
I would offer there's opportunities right now to invest in the rehousing system that I described to you. So you heard about some of the incredible investments by Bank of America and others in the Dallas Real-Time Rapid Rehousing Initiative, but this system doesn't plan on stopping with this one initiative. What's coming next is looking very distinctly at how to expand the amount of housing that's available to us, not just how we access housing that already exists. And there's going to be tremendous opportunities to invest in helping to expand that market, helping to expand how we connect rental subsidies to that market. And I think this is really important, how we connect the vital services that help individuals remain stably housed. So through the behavioral health system, through the physical health system, and all of those social supports. There's huge opportunities to invest and become connected as an advocate in that space. So.
All right, shameless 30-second plug since we're almost out of time. Uh-oh, can you guys see me?
Yes.
Okay, you guys froze again, but one thing you can do is we are seeing an uptick in evictions. We certainly need to hire more lawyers here to represent people to do this at scale. And so we will take all the help we can get, recruiting volunteers or helping to fund those lawyer salaries. My wife and I don't take any salary for doing this. It's all volunteer for us, but we do have full-time staff lawyers that take on this work. And we're not seeing any slowdown in the near future. So please call if you have an interest in working with us on this.
Thanks, Mark. Well, we are at time. Thank you so much to Joli, Mark, and Mandy for your wisdom today. I hope that folks who tuned in left with new ideas of how to plug in and support our housing ecosystem in Dallas. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.